The orc woman woke to silence, and that alone told her something was terribly wrong. Nara Steelridge's eyes snapped open to find golden sunlight streaming through the small window of the hired hand's room, the angle all wrong, far too steep, meaning the sun had climbed well past dawn and into true morning. Her heart seized. In 32 years of life, she had never once overslept. Could not afford to. Every place she had ever laid her head had taught her the same brutal lesson. Sleep lightly, keep one ear on the door, or wake to empty pockets and boot heels already disappearing down the road. Or worse, wake to hands rifling through her things while she scrambled for a weapon she no longer had because they had taken that first. She bolted upright in the narrow bed, her breath coming fast, green fingers clutching the worn quilt as she oriented herself. The room was still here. The small chest of belongings against the wall, undisturbed. The door closed. The floorboards beyond it quiet. No sounds of hurried footsteps. No muffled laughter of thieves who thought themselves clever. Just the far-away cluck of chickens and the creak of the farmhouse settling in the warmth. Nara pressed a hand to her chest, felt her pulse hammering beneath her palm. She had overslept. How could she have overslept? She threw off the quilt and dressed quickly, pulling on her worn leather breeches and linen shirt, both mended so many times the original stitching was more suggestion than structure. Her hands shook as she laced her boots. This was the 5th week she had worked at the Keller farm. 5 weeks of mucking stalls and mending fences and hauling water from the well. 5 weeks of the best pay she had ever earned, and the strangest employer she had ever met, Damon Keller. The man was a puzzle she had not yet solved. She hurried out of the small room that adjoined the barn, crossing the dusty yard toward the main house. The chickens scattered before her, squawking their indignation. The farmhouse was a rambling structure, 2 stories of weathered wood that had clearly been added onto over the years, rooms sprouting like afterthoughts wherever space allowed. It should have felt chaotic, but instead it felt lived in, comfortable in a way that made Nara's chest tighten with something she refused to name. The kitchen door stood open to catch the late summer breeze. She stepped inside and found Damon at the wide wooden table, surrounded by account books and what appeared to be a half-eaten breakfast. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into that easy smile that had confused her from the first day. "There she is," he said, setting down his pen. "I was beginning to think you'd decided to take the day off." Damon Keller was perhaps 35, with brown hair that curled at his collar and warm hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was often. Too often, Nara thought sometimes. He smiled like a man who had never learned the dangers of showing his teeth. He was built like his work, broad-shouldered and strong from years of farm work, maybe just over 6 feet tall with capable hands that were usually stained with soil or ink. "I overslept," Nara said flatly, hating how the words tasted like failure. "It will not happen again." "Overslept?" Damon's eyebrows rose. "Well, that's hardly a hanging offense. You've been working sunrise to sunset for weeks. I'd say you earned a morning to rest." She stared at him, searching for the trap in his words. There was always a trap. Kind words were usually followed by docked pay or extra work, or some reminder that generosity was a loan, not a gift. But Damon just held her gaze with that same open expression, as though he genuinely meant what he said. "The fences still need mending," she said finally. "And the northern field will still be there this afternoon," Damon interrupted gently. "Have you eaten?" "No." "Then sit, I made extra." Nara hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from him. The kitchen smelled of bacon and fresh bread, and her stomach twisted with hunger she had been ignoring. Damon pushed a plate toward her, already loaded with food as though he had been waiting for her. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Nara had learned in her weeks here that Damon did not mind quiet the way some people did not feel the need to fill every moment with chatter. It was one of the things that had allowed her to stay as long as she had. That, and the fact that he paid her fairly at the end of each week, coin counted out into her palm without ceremony or comment. "You know," Damon said eventually, leaning back in his chair, "I don't think I've ever seen you sleep past dawn. Do you always wake that early, or is it just here?" "Everywhere," Nara said before she could think better of it. Then, because he was watching her with those curious, non-threatening eyes, she added, "It is safer that way." "Safer," Damon repeated slowly, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity. She would have stood and walked out if it had been pity, but understanding, and maybe sadness. "Because of people taking your things." Nara's hand tightened on her fork. She had not told him that. Had not told him anything, really, beyond her name and her ability to work. But Damon had a way of seeing things, of noticing the way she always positioned herself with her back to walls, or how she flinched at unexpected sounds, or the fact that everything she owned fit into a single battered chest. "Yes," she said. Damon nodded, did not press. Instead he said, "Well, your things are still in your room. I checked this morning when you didn't come out, just to make sure you were still breathing. Figured if you'd finally decided to rest, the least I could do was make sure nobody bothered you." Something in Nara's chest cracked just a little. "You checked on me. Seemed like the decent thing to do," Damon said, shrugging. "You work hard, Nara. Harder than any hand I've ever hired. I figured you could use the sleep." She did not know what to say to that. In 3 decades of life, no one had ever cared whether she was resting or not. Work was work, and if you collapsed from exhaustion, that was your own fault for being weak. "Thank you," she said finally, the words rough and unpracticed. Damon's smile gentled. "You're welcome. Now finish your breakfast. The fences can wait until you're ready." The days that followed fell into an easier rhythm. Nara still woke early, but no longer with that sharp edge of panic, no longer with her hand reaching for a weapon that was not there. The work was hard but satisfying, and Damon proved to be a good employer in ways that went beyond fair pay. He worked alongside her more often than not, his presence steady and unhurried. He told terrible jokes while they mended fences, humming old songs under his breath. He brought water and bread for their midday meals, eating in the shade of whatever field they were tending. He also talked, not in the prying way some people did, but in a way that invited her to talk back if she wanted. He told her about the farm, how it had been in his family for 2 generations. He mentioned his late wife, Marissa, without the heavy grief that made condolences necessary, just a warm remembrance of someone he had loved. She had died 4 years ago of a fever that came on fast and left him alone in this rambling house with more rooms than one man needed. "I kept thinking I'd sell it," he admitted one afternoon as they replaced rotted boards in the barn. "Seemed foolish to stay in a place built for a family when it was just me, but I couldn't make myself do it. Marissa loved this place, and I suppose I kept hoping." He trailed off and Nara glanced at him. "Hoping what?" "That it would feel like a home again," Damon said quietly, "instead of just a house I happen to live in." Nara understood that better than she wanted to admit. She had never had a home, only places she stayed until staying became impossible. The difference between a house and a home seemed as vast as the difference between surviving and living. "It is a good house," she offered, and Damon's smile when he looked at her was worth the awkwardness of the words. Over the weeks, Nara began to notice things about him beyond his easy charm. The way his hands trembled slightly when he poured his morning coffee, a tell that he had not slept well. The way he cooked far too much food, as though still expecting 2 people at the table instead of 1. The way he sometimes stood in the doorway of the farmhouse at sunset, looking out at the fields with an expression that suggested he was seeing ghosts. He was lonely, she realized. For all his smiles and jokes, Damon Keller was achingly lonely. He wore his charm like armor, the same way she wore her vigilance, both of them trying to protect hearts that had learned how much the world could hurt. The realization made her feel something she could not quite name, something warm and uncomfortable and terrifying. Summer began its slow slide into autumn. The work shifted from mending to harvesting, long days in the fields gathering hay and vegetables, preparing for the colder months ahead. Nara found herself staying later in the main house some evenings, helping Damon with the account books because her arithmetic was better than his, or simply sitting at the kitchen table while he cooked dinner. "You don't have to eat alone in the barn," he said one evening, setting a bowl of stew in front of her without asking. "There's plenty of room here." "You are already paying me and giving me a room," Nara said. "I should not take your food as well." "I'm making it anyway," Damon pointed out. "And I'm tired of eating alone. Humor me." So she did. And somehow those shared meals became routine, became something she looked forward to in a way that frightened her. Because looking forward to things meant attachment, and attachment meant pain when it inevitably ended. But Damon made it hard to maintain her walls. He asked her opinion on crop rotations and listened when she answered. He laughed at himself when he burned the bread and did not get angry when she teased him for it. He existed in his own skin with a comfort she envied, a man who had been hurt by loss but had not let it make him cruel or closed. "Why are you so kind?" she asked one night, the question escaping before she could stop it. They were sitting at the table, dinner finished, the dishes washed and put away. Damon had been telling her about his plans for the spring planting, but he stopped at her question, tilting his head. "What do you mean, you are kind?" Nara said, struggling to articulate what she meant. "To me." "To everyone, even when there is no benefit to you." "Why?" Damon considered this, his fingers tracing idle patterns on the worn wood of the table. "I suppose because the world's hard enough without us making it harder on each other," he said finally. "Marissa used to say that kindness was the only thing that cost nothing and meant everything. I don't know if that's true, but I guess I decided to believe it anyway." "People have stolen from me," Nara said quietly. "Hurt me, driven me away from every place I tried to stay. How do you trust that kindness will not be used against you?" "I don't," Damon said simply. "Not always. But I figure if I stop being kind because I'm afraid of getting hurt, then the people who hurt me have already won. They've made me like them. And I'd rather get hurt staying myself than stay safe becoming someone I hate." Nara stared at him, something in her chest aching. "That is foolish." "Probably," Damon agreed, but he was smiling. "But it's my kind of foolish." She wanted to tell him that his kindness was dangerous, that it would get him taken advantage of, that the world was not gentle with people who insisted on being soft. But the words would not come, because he was looking at her with those warm eyes, and she realized with a start that she did not want him to change, did not want him to become hard and suspicious like her. She wanted him to stay exactly as he was, this strange, charming man who made too much food and told terrible jokes and had somehow made her feel safe enough to oversleep. The realization terrified her. Autumn deepened. The leaves turned gold and crimson, and the air gained a crisp edge that promised winter was not far behind. Nara had been at the Keller farm for 3 months, the longest she had stayed anywhere in 5 years. She should have moved on by now. Should have taken her saved coin and found the next place before this one fell apart like all the others. But she did not want to leave. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. She was mucking out the stalls one gray afternoon when she heard the horses. 3 of them, coming up the road at a pace too fast for casual travel. Nara's instincts, honed by years of trouble, went immediately on alert. She set down her pitchfork and moved to the barn door, wiping her hands on her breeches. 3 men rode into the yard. They were rough-looking, the kind who wore their meanness like a badge. The one in the lead was tall and rangy, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Nara recognized him instantly, and her blood went cold. Garrett Thorne. The man who had robbed her blind 2 years ago in a border town 3 territories away, taking everything she had, including the knife her mother had given her. She had thought she would never see him again, had hoped distance would be enough. Apparently, she had been wrong. Garrett's eyes found her immediately, and his face split into a grin that made her stomach turn. Well, if it isn't our old friend, didn't expect to find you here, Greenskin." Nara forced herself to stand still to not show fear. "What do you want?" "Heard you'd been working in these parts," Garrett said, dismounting with an easy grace that belied his bulk. His companions followed suit, spreading out in a way that was clearly intentional. "Thought we'd come see how you were doing, maybe collect what you owe us." "I owe you nothing." "See, I disagree," Garrett said, his smile never wavering. "Way I figure it, you ran off before we could properly discuss terms last time. That makes you in debt." The kitchen door opened and Damon stepped out into the yard. He must have heard the horses. His expression was pleasant, but Nara had learned to read him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes assessed the 3 men with quick intelligence. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Damon said, his voice carrying that easy charm that could disarm or deflect. "Something I can help you with?" Garrett's attention shifted, and Nara saw the calculation in his eyes. "You the owner here?" "Damon Keller," Damon said, not offering his hand. "This is my farm." "Well, Mr. Keller, we've got business with your hand there," Garrett said, jerking his chin toward Nara. "Private business. Won't take long." "Anything you need to discuss with Nara, you can discuss in front of me," Damon said, and there was steel beneath the pleasant tone now. "She works for me, which makes her business my business." Garrett's smile thinned. That's so. The yard went quiet, tension pulling tight as a bowstring. Nara wanted to tell Damon to go back inside, that this was her problem and he should not get involved. But she also knew him well enough by now to know he would not listen. Damon Keller might be charming and soft-hearted, but he was not a coward. "Here's how this is going to work," Garrett said, his hand drifting toward the knife at his belt. "Your little orc friend here is going to come with us and settle her debts. You're going to stay out of it, seeing as it's none of your concern, and everybody goes home happy. Or," Damon said calmly, "you 3 are going to get back on your horses and leave my property. And I won't report you to the constable in town for trespassing and making threats." One of Garrett's companions, a stocky man with a face like a balled fist, laughed. "You and what army farmer?" Damon did not move, but Nara saw something shift in him, a readiness that suggested he was more than just a simple farmer. "The army of neighbors who'll hear the signal bell and come running. The constable who knows me well enough to believe every word I say. And the fact that I'm a veteran of the territorial militia, and know exactly how to make this very unpleasant for all 3 of you without breaking a single law." That last part was news to Nara, but it clearly landed with Garrett, who reassessed Damon with narrowed eyes. "Big talk," Garrett said, but there was uncertainty there now. "Not talk," Damon said. "Just facts. Now I'm going to ask once more politely, leave my property." The tension stretched, seconds that felt like hours. Nara's hand inched toward the pitchfork she had left leaning against the barn, ready to fight if this went bad. But Garrett was a bully, and bullies did not like fair fights. After a long moment, he spat into the dirt. "Fine," he said. "But this isn't over, Greenskin. We'll be around." "If you're around," Damon said, his voice gone cold as winter, "I'll make sure the constable knows exactly who to look for. And I'll make sure every farm in the territory knows your faces. See how well your business goes when everyone's watching." Garrett's jaw worked, but he jerked his head at his companions. They mounted up, and Garrett gave Nara one last look that promised this was not finished. Then they wheeled their horses and rode back down the road, faster than they had come. The yard fell silent except for the chickens resuming their scratching. Nara realized she was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. Damon walked over to her, his expression concerned. "You all right?" "You should not have done that," Nara said, her voice coming out harsher than she intended. "You should have stayed inside and let them take you." Damon's eyebrows rose. "Not likely." "They will come back," Nara said. "Garrett does not let things go, and now you have made yourself a target." "Then we'll deal with it together," Damon said simply. "Nara, you think I just stand by and let someone threaten you on my own property? I am just your hired hand." "No," Damon said quietly, "you're not." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Nara stared at him, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. "What am I then?" Damon's expression softened, and he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her green skin. "You're someone I care about, someone who's become important to me. And I don't let people I care about get hurt if I can help it." "Damon." "I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know people will talk, and that there's 100 reasons this doesn't make sense. But I've been alone in this house for 4 years, Nara. And in the 3 months you've been here, it's felt like a home again. You make it feel like a home, and I care about you. A lot." Nara's throat tightened. She wanted to pull her hand away to protect herself from the inevitable pain of this ending badly. But she also wanted to hold on to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be different. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I have never, no one has ever." "Cared," Damon finished gently. When she nodded, he squeezed her hand. "Well, I do. And we'll figure out the rest together if you're willing." "Those men will handle them," Damon said firmly. "Together. That's what people do when they care about each other. They face things together." Nara looked at him, this strange, kind, impossibly stubborn man who had somehow seen past her walls and decided she was worth defending, worth caring about, and for the first time in her life, she let herself believe it might be true. "Together," she echoed, testing the word. It felt foreign but not unwelcome. Damon's smile was sunrise bright. "Together." The next morning, Damon rode into town and came back with Constable Marcus Penn, a grizzled man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Damon told him everything, describing the 3 men in detail. Marcus listened, took notes, and promised to keep watch. "Garrett Thorne," Marcus said, frowning. "Name's familiar. I'll send word to the neighboring territories, see if he's wanted anywhere. In the meantime, Keller, you keep your eyes open. And you," he nodded to Nara, "stay close to the farm. Men like that are cowards, but they're also persistent." Over the following week, Damon did something Nara had not expected. He rode to the neighboring farms, not to gossip or spread fear, but to quietly let people know there might be trouble. And because Damon was well-liked and respected, because he had helped most of these families at one time or another, they listened. More than that, they offered to help. "You ring that bell," old Farmer Whitmore said, jabbing a gnarled finger at Damon, "and we'll come running. Don't care what time it is." "Same here," agreed Helena Cross, who ran the orchard 2 miles south. "Anyone threatening our people threatens all of us." Nara watched this happen with something like wonder. In her entire life she had been alone, had relied on no one but herself because no one else could be relied upon. But Damon had built something here, a community of people who looked out for each other. And somehow, impossibly, she had become part of it. The days passed with heightened vigilance. Nara fell back into her old habits, sleeping lightly, listening for trouble. But now Damon was listening too, and somehow that made the burden lighter. They worked closer together, neither of them going far from the main house or each other. And in the evenings, after dinner, they sat at the kitchen table and talked about things that mattered, about loss and loneliness, about hope and fear, about the terrifying possibility of building something that might last. "I never thought I would want this," Nara admitted one night, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. "A place to stay, someone to stay with," Damon supplied, and when she nodded, he smiled. "I didn't either. After Marissa died, I figured that part of my life was over. But then you showed up, all prickly and suspicious and working yourself to exhaustion, and I thought, well, there's someone who needs a soft place to land." "I am not soft," Nara said, but there was no bite to it. "No," Damon agreed. "You're strong, strongest person I know. But strength doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone." Nara looked at him across the table, this man who had somehow become her anchor, her safety, her home. "I am afraid," she confessed, "that this will end, that something will take it away." "I'm afraid of that too," Damon said honestly. "But I'm more afraid of not trying, of letting fear keep me from something good." Nara reached across the table and took his hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "Then we try. We try," Damon agreed. 2 weeks after Garrett's first visit, they came back. Nara woke to the sound of hooves in the deep of night, her old instincts screaming danger. She was out of bed and dressed in seconds, her hand grabbing the stout cudgel she kept by the door now. But even as she moved, she heard Damon's footsteps in the main house, heard him moving with purpose. She met him in the yard. He had a hunting horn in one hand and a shotgun in the other, his face grim in the moonlight. "How many?" he asked quietly. "3, Nara said, her sharp ears picking up the sounds. "Maybe 4, coming from the north road. Go ring the bell," Damon said. "I'll hold them here." But Nara shook her head. "Together, remember," Damon looked at her, and something fierce and proud crossed his face. "Together." He handed her the horn. "Then you call for help, and I'll make sure they know they picked the wrong farm." Nara ran to the signal bell mounted on the post near the house and rang it hard, the clanging cutting through the night air. Once, twice, 3 times the signal for danger. Then she was running back to Damon's side as 4 riders came into the yard. Garrett Thorne was in the lead again, but this time he had reinforcements, and this time he was not bothering with pleasant pretenses. He had a cudgel in his hand, and his companions were armed as well. "Told you we'd be back," Garrett snarled. "Now, you can hand over the orc and whatever coin you've got, or we can take it the hard way. Or you can leave now and maybe avoid the noose," came a voice from the darkness. Constable Marcus Penn stepped into the yard, a rifle in his hands. He was not alone. Farmer Whitmore was there, and Helena Cross, and at least 6 other neighbors, all armed, all watching the 4 intruders with hard eyes. "Garrett Thorne," Marcus said conversationally, "you're wanted in 2 territories for robbery and assault. And now I can add trespassing, attempted theft, and threatening violence to the list. You want to add resisting arrest, or are you smart enough to surrender?" Garrett's face went white, then red. He looked around at the assembled farmers, at Marcus's rifle, at Damon and Nara standing side by side. The odds had shifted dramatically, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he started to say, but Marcus cut him off. "It is. Drop your weapons. Now." For a moment, Nara thought Garrett might be stupid enough to fight, but even he could see the futility. Slowly, He and his companions dropped their weapons. Marcus and two of the other men moved in to bind them, efficient and professional. "Thank you all for coming," Damon said to the assembled neighbors, his voice rough with emotion. "I appreciate it." "That's what neighbors do," Whitmore said gruffly. "Now, let's get these bastards locked up proper." The constable and several farmers led the bound men away, their horses trailing behind. The yard slowly emptied, neighbors offering nods and quiet assurances before heading back to their own homes. Finally, it was just Damon and Nara standing in the moonlit yard, the danger past, the threat eliminated. "It is over," Nara said, and she heard the wonder in her own voice. "They will face justice. They will not come back." "No," Damon agreed. "They won't." Nara turned to look at him, this man who had defended her, who had rallied a community to protect her, who had stood beside her when every instinct screamed that people could not be trusted. "You did that. You made that happen." "We did that," Damon corrected gently. "You rang the bell. You stood your ground. We faced it together, just like we said we would." Nara felt something break loose in her chest, some last wall crumbling. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Damon, holding tight. He returned the embrace immediately, his arms strong and sure around her. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for everything." "Nara," Damon said, and she heard the emotion in his voice. "You don't have to thank me. You're home. This is your home now if you want it to be." She pulled back just enough to look at him to see the truth in his eyes. "I want it to be," she said. I want to stay with you." Damon's smile was radiant even in the darkness. "Then stay. Stay as long as you want. Forever if you're willing." "Forever is a long time," Nara said, but she was smiling too, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I certainly hope so," Damon said, and then he kissed her, gentle and sure and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Nara rested her forehead against his. "I think I might actually be able to sleep tonight," she said. "Really sleep?" "Good," Damon said warmly. "Because you're moving into the main house. No more sleeping in the barn room, and no more sleeping lightly. Not here. Not ever again." Autumn gave way to winter and winter to spring. The farm continued its rhythms, the work endless but satisfying. Nara moved into the main house, into the spare room at first, and then, as the months passed and the relationship deepened, into Damon's room. The transition was gradual, natural, as easy as everything else with him. The community that had rallied to protect her became her community in truth. She helped Helena with the orchard harvest and learned bread making from Whitmore's wife. She was no longer the orc woman who worked at the Keller farm. She was Nara, Damon's partner, part of the fabric of the area. Constable Penn sent word in early spring that Garrett Thorne and his companions had been tried and sentenced to hard labor in the territorial prison. The case was closed. The threat was truly over. "How does it feel?" Damon asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the fields gold. "Strange," Nara admitted. "Good, but strange. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Maybe nothing will go wrong," Damon suggested. "Maybe this is just life. Good life." Nara leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. "I am starting to believe that." That summer, Damon asked her to marry him. It was not a grand gesture he asked over breakfast one morning, his hands nervous as he pushed a simple silver ring across the table. "I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know people will talk and it will cause trouble sometimes, but I love you, Nara, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me." Nara looked at the ring, then at him, and felt her eyes sting with tears she did not bother to hide. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." They married in late summer, a small ceremony in the yard with the neighbors as witnesses. Constable Penn officiated and Helena provided flowers from her orchard. It was simple and perfect, and everything Nara had never let herself dream of. The harvest that year was abundant, the best the farm had seen in a decade. Damon joked that it was Nara's doing, that she had brought luck with her. Nara thought maybe it was just hard work and good weather, but she let him have his superstition. The first real test came in the autumn of their first year of marriage. A storm rolled in off the plains, one of those late-season tempests that threatened to tear the world apart. Rain lashed the farmhouse, thunder shaking the walls. Nara woke to the sound of it, her old instincts surging, expecting danger. But Damon's arm was around her waist, his breathing slow and steady. The house was secure, the doors locked, the animals safely in the barn. There was nothing to do but wait out the storm, nothing to defend against. Just weather which would pass. Nara settled back into the warmth of the bed, into the safety of her husband's embrace. She listened to the storm rage outside, but for the first time in her life she felt no fear. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. And then, remarkably, impossibly, she slept. Deeply and soundly, with both ears deaf to the door, with no vigilance required. She slept through the worst of the storm, waking only when morning light crept through the window and the thunder had faded to distant rumbles. Damon was already awake, watching her with a soft smile. "You slept through it," he said wonderingly. "The whole storm. I've never seen you sleep that deeply." Nara stretched, feeling rested in a way she could not remember ever feeling before. "I did," she said, and then smiled. "I finally did." "No nightmares, no waking up every hour, none," Nara said. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at the simple miracle of it. I think I finally feel safe, really safe." Damon caught her hand and kissed her palm. "Good, that's all I ever wanted for you." They rose together and went to check the damage from the storm. Some branches down, a section of fence to mend, but nothing catastrophic. The land had weathered it well, as had they. As they walked the property together, surveying what needed repair, Nara felt a profound sense of contentment settle over her. This was her life now. This farm, this man, this community that had accepted her. After 33 years of running, of never staying, of sleeping with one ear always on the door, she had finally found a place where she could rest, where she could build, where she could simply be. "What are you thinking?" Damon asked, watching her with that perceptive gaze. "I am thinking," Nara said slowly, "that I want to stay here for the rest of my life. I want to plant trees that will outlive us and raise animals and maybe, someday, children. I want to become so rooted in this place that nothing could move me." Damon's smile was brilliant. "I want that too." "All of it." "Then we will make it happen," Nara said. "Together." "Together," Damon agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. The seasons turned. They planted an orchard that first spring of their marriage, apple and pear trees that would take years to bear fruit. They expanded the farm, taking on hired hands of their own in busy seasons, always treating them fairly, always paying what was owed. Nara became known in the region not just as Damon's wife, but as a skilled farmer in her own right, someone whose advice was sought and valued. There were still difficulties, of course. Some people remained suspicious of an orc in their midst, whispered behind hands about Damon's choice of wife. But the whispers grew quieter as the years passed, and it became clear that Nara was not going anywhere, that she was as much a part of the community as anyone born there. And through it all, Nara slept. Deeply and peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was home. The vigilance that had defined her for so long faded, replaced by trust. Trust in Damon, in their neighbors, in the life they had built together. 5 years after their marriage, on a crisp autumn morning during the harvest, Nara woke to find Damon already up, sitting by the window and watching the sun rise over their fields. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "Remembering?" she asked softly. "Marissa," Damon admitted. "It's her birthday. She would have been 42 today." Nara leaned her head against his shoulder. They had learned to make space for Marissa's memory in their marriage, understanding that loving someone new did not mean forgetting someone lost. "She would be happy you are not alone anymore." "I think she would like you," Damon said, his voice thick. "You're both stubborn as hell and twice as strong," Nara smiled. "I think I would have liked her too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky pink and gold. Their fields stretched out before them, golden with ripe wheat, the orchard beyond showing the first signs of autumn color. It was beautiful in a way that made Nara's chest ache, not with sadness but with gratitude. "I never thought I would have this," she said quietly. "Never thought I could." "Neither did I," Damon replied. "After Marissa died, I thought that was it, that I had used up my share of happiness. But then you showed up, terrified and exhausted and trying so hard not to show it, and you gave me a second chance at this. At home. At love." Nara turned to look at him, this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen her anyway. "We gave each other a second chance. Best decision I ever made," Damon said, "was hiring a stubborn orc woman who didn't trust me as far as she could throw me." "Best decision I ever made," Nara countered, "was oversleeping that one morning. If I had woken on time, I might have been too afraid to stay." Damon laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Then thank goodness for exhaustion and a comfortable bed." They went down to breakfast together, to another day of work and life and the thousand small joys that made up a marriage. The harvest came in heavy and healthy. The neighbors gathered for a celebration, a tradition that marked the end of the growing season. There was food and music, children running wild in the dusk, couples dancing in the firelight. Damon pulled Nara into the dance, and though she protested that she did not know the steps, he guided her through them with patient humor. They laughed when she stepped on his feet and laughed harder when he spun her too fast, and they nearly collided with Farmer Whitmore. Later, as the party wound down and people began to head home, Helena Cross pulled Nara aside. The older woman had become something of a friend over the years, a steady presence who never treated Nara as anything other than an equal. "You look happy," Helena observed. "I am," Nara said simply. "Good, you deserve it." Helena squeezed her arm. "Both of you deserve it." As the last guests departed, and Damon and Nara cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, a sense of deep peace settled over the farm. They worked side by side as they did everything, talking quietly about small things: the need to repair the barn roof before winter, the possibility of adding more chickens, whether they should plant corn or beans in the northern field next spring. Ordinary things. Beautiful, ordinary things. That night, lying in bed with Damon's arm around her and the sound of late crickets singing through the open window, Nara thought about how far she had come. From sleeping lightly with one ear always on the door, always ready to run, to this sleeping deeply, both ears deaf to danger, secure in the knowledge that she was home. "Damon," she murmured into the darkness. Thank you for being patient with me, for waiting while I learned to trust this." Damon's arm tightened around her. "You don't need to thank me for that. You were worth waiting for. You're worth everything." Nara closed her eyes, let herself sink into the warmth and safety of his presence. Outside, the wind rustled through the fields, carrying the scent of harvest and the promise of seasons to come. Inside, everything was still and peaceful and exactly as it should be. She slept deeply that night, as she did every night now. No vigilance required, no ear on the door, no fear of what morning might bring. Just rest, profound and healing, in the home she had built with the man she loved, The farm that had once been just a place Damon lived had become a home in truth, filled with laughter and work and love. And the woman who had spent her whole life sleeping lightly, always ready to run, had finally found a place worth staying for. A place where she could sleep soundly through any storm, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, she was valued, and she was home. Forever.